I said 11:30 on a Sunday, there's going to be nobody. So thank you very much. I was wondering how exactly do I make this presentation, because I've written across film and television and books, and I didn't know what kind of audience this was going to be. So I finally decided I'm going to treat you as a co-writer audience. I'm going to speak to you as co-creative people. Each of us have a creative journey, and I'm sure each of you is somewhere on that journey. So I'm going to share my journey and my process, and if that's of any help or any use to you, it'll make me very happy. Okay. So I have to juggle a mic and a clicker and a lot of things. Okay, so this morning I took out all the books I've written, and I looked at them and I felt very pleased. But you know, behind this is a larger pile, and there'll be a pile about 5 times that height, which is the work that I've done for television and film. The television and film, commercial film in India, are very bubblegum mediums. You watch TV and it's gone, you chew it and you throw it away. So there's been a lot of work done there as well, so I'm going to share that journey with you too, because that shaped me very much as a writer, and it shaped my choices along the way. Okay, so I was lucky. I got a really early start. I was brought up in Calcutta, and Calcutta, as you know, if anyone lived there earlier, used to have terrible power cuts. And the power would go off, and it would stay off for 9 hours. And in our house, whenever the power went off, something very exciting happened. There'd be all these knocks on the door, tuck, 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 tuck. And when you open them, all the neighborhood kids would be standing outside, because my mum was a fantastic storyteller. And she'd light a single candle, and she'd seat us all on the floor, and then she'd start telling us ghost stories. And as she told us these ghost stories, we'd get closer, and we'd get closer, and finally there'd be many children clutching her, all petrified. But nobody wanted the story to stop. Everybody would be saying, and then, and then. And then is really the key question that a writer has to figure out. As I started, so I got a really early start. I saw how powerful stories could be. I saw how you could grab people with storytelling, and I decided that's what I'm going to do. And as I grew up and I started experimenting with writing, I realized that and then is actually one of the crucial things that a writer has to create. And then is what you want your audience to do. You want them to hold them so strongly with the story that they're turning every page, unable to let go, saying, and then what happens? And then what happens? So that to me is a central factor of being a good storyteller, is figuring out how you get kids to say, and grown-ups to say, and then. Okay. So I'm going to read you the book also. This was the very first book that I wrote. It's called Dungeon Tales. It actually contains all my mum's stories, kind of refurbished and recycled and made a little bit up-to-date and fun. And yeah, it's a tribute to all the grandmas and the traditional stories that they told. I also did it in a very traditional method of storytelling. We're now very used to the Western idea of storytelling, where there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And you go from one all the way through to the rest. But that's not how we told our stories. If you look at the Arabian Nights, if you look, it starts with one story, and she starts telling you about a genie. Then she tells you about the genie's mother. Then she tells you about a monster that she fought. Then the monster tells you a story about a king that was a very bad king. And so you wind all over the place. It's also the storytelling that is used in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. You know, a hero is announced and his lineage is announced. Then you're told a story about his father. Then you're told a story about his mother. Then you're told a story about the ghost that his great-grandfather fought with. And the stories wind all over the place. And I found that really, really fascinating. So this is a book that does that. There's a central holding thread of a story, which is that there's a very, very bad Badshah. He's so bad, he's called a Badmash Badshah. And he has locked up everyone in his dungeon. For any excuse at all, he's been arresting people and putting them in his dungeon. And eventually what happens is there's so many screams and cries and wailing and weeping from the dungeon that he can't sleep. So he calls up everyone one by one, and they tell him their stories. And the book is a collection of the stories told by the people who come up from the dungeon. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of one of the stories so you get a flavor of what the book is about. And each of these stories, while it was a tribute to a traditional story, it also contains some of the fascinations that I have with India. And one of my Indian fascinations are the names that you come across in India. I've actually met someone called Safety Pin. Just fabulous names, and names carry whole stories in them. If you're an Indian and someone tells you their name, you can tell their caste, their creed, which part of India they come from. You know, everything. There's a whole lot of things that you can tell from them. I find that really fascinating. So, this is a story called The Man with No Name. And who do we have today? Asked the Badmash Badshah. I don't know, Your Highness, said the jailer. The prisoner stubbornly refusing to give his name. He doesn't have any name, said the chief minister. Nonsense, said the Badmash Badshah. Everybody has a name, a surname, a nickname, a pet name. Take me, for example. I've got dozens. My real name is Badshah Alam Zabardast Kasai Dhulelal Sikandar Nusrat Fateh Ali Cuddles Hajami. Cuddle, said the Prime Minister. My mother named me that, said the Badmash Badshah, looking bashful. I too had a name my mother called me, said the prisoner, sighing sadly. How I lost it is a long story. Go ahead, said the Badmash Badshah, we have all night. And then the prisoner starts telling his story, and this is a story of how he was so forgetful that he forgot his own name. And there's one point at which the entire court starts they start to guess his name. Okay? And this was the bit I had fun with. And this is one of the key things for writing for kids, have fun. Spell it, the chief torturer is called. And he says, we can get anything out of a man. We can even get him to confess to things he hasn't done. So he starts to ask questions and he says, is your name soda water bottle opener wala? No, said the man. Is it Mulchand, Raichand, Gigi boy? I don't think so. Is it Rampyare? No. Is it Hasmukrai? No. Is it Karurimal? No. Is it Shahzade Ali Sahib Pataudi? No. Is it Screwwala? No. Latkan Tapu? Garbar Jhala? Mito Dictophos? No, no, no. I have it, said the Prime Minister. Your name is Alfonso. The whole court started guessing. Tuk-tuki, Min-mini, Papu, Pinky, Sweetie. So basically these are all real names, including Sahibzade Ali Sahib Pataudi, who you better know as the actor Saif Ali Khan. So a lot of my fascination spilt into that book. That was my first book. It's still going strong, and next year we're doing Dungeon Tales Part 2 on popular demand from kids across India who just wanted one more. I said, okay, I'll write it. Where did I put my clicker? Okay, so I'm going to share with you why I think stories really matter, and especially children's stories really, really matter. You know, I was at, on the 19th of December, on Goa Liberation Day, I was at Don Bosco School. I'd been invited to be the chief guest and hoist the flag. So I asked all the parents and the adults there, I said, do you remember what a hypotenuse is? Do you remember what a rhombus is? Do you remember what a dodecahedron is? They were like, I said, do you remember the stories that you learnt in school? And everyone remembered the stories that they read in school. Stories that you read growing up stay with you. They are very, very fundamental to forming some of your ideas. Those ideas don't come out of the books that are taught to you. They come out of the stories that you love. So what's been formed when you read a story is your idea of what is heroic, what is worth fighting for, what is good, what is evil. And these are really the most fundamental and important things that we can teach our children. And they are learning these from stories. And that is why the stories that you choose for your children, or your children choose for themselves, are really, really important. This is what will stay with them all their lives. The issue I have with a lot of children's writers is that they're still very British. The British left with us a very Victorian idea of what a childhood was, where children are supposed to be very sweet and innocent, and you're supposed to tell them fairy stories with little fairies who are pink and blue and flutter around the place with wings. And I despise these stories, because that's not what childhood is. Childhood is a time of the greatest fear, the greatest terrors, and the deepest feeling. When you're a child is when you first experience rejection. And it hurts so badly because you haven't learned your adult coping mechanisms of how to deal with it. When you're a child, it's the first time you'll feel love so very, very deeply. It's the first time that you'll feel isolation, fear. Every emotion is felt deeply by children. Their lives actually have an emotional landscape that is of such intensity that we cannot actually remember what it was like at that time, because we've learned, as we've grown older, we've learned to cope, we've learned to numb ourselves to some degree. And therefore, when you write a children's book, I think it is very unfair to the child to pretend that all is well, and one little moral will fix the world, you know, and they lived happily ever after. People don't live happily ever after, unfortunately. So I think that if you are writing with any sort of honesty for a children's audience, it behooves you to speak to them with intelligence, to speak to them with depth, to speak to them at the level that they are actually living, which is deeply and intensely. So for me, writing for children is very, very difficult, because this is what you're dealing with. And at the same time, you have to find your balance. on how you deal with these issues. How do you get kids to engaged without frightening them, without scaring them, with opening a conversation that at a child's eye level can explain a lot. So it's a very, very challenging medium. And it's also the most difficult medium to write in that you can imagine. Anyone who has a child, I mean, there's some kids right here in the room, you know what it takes to hold a child's attention, right? We're telling them a story and they don't like it. Three sentences in, they run off to do something else. If you give them a book, first paragraph doesn't work for them, that's it, they've shut the book. So this is an audience that really keeps you on your toes as a writer. You can't afford a spare paragraph, you can't afford a spare line, virtually. So you really, really have to be top of the game when you're writing for children. Okay. Their attention span is extremely short. So therefore, how do you hold that? You have to write with a certain amount of intensity. You have to write with a certain amount of skill so that every para hooks you to the next, immense amount of skill required writing for kids. And they're living in a world where books are not the only things that are telling them stories. When we were growing up, it was different. What did we have? We had books. Then along came black and white television, and then came color television, and my God, how our world expanded. But children today have stories being told to them by multiple media. They're watching stories on their phones, they're watching stories in halls. So you are, as a writer, you're writing a book that is competing with an enormous screen in Inox that is telling a story that's blown up to that size with sound effects and SFX and the whole works. So how do you do it? Okay. The last thing that I find with creating stories for kids is, all our kids go to the hall and they see things like WALL-E or they see Toy Story. Now these are all very complicated bits of storytelling. These are beautifully written films and they tackle themes and they tackle depth. And a child that big watches these films. So they are appreciating extremely sophisticated storytelling. But when you hand them a book, their reading skills don't match the appreciation that they already have of storytelling. So you're handing them a book and at the level that they can read, they can only read simple sentences, or they can, the cat met the dog, Spot jumped over the log, these kind of silly books we give them. But they've learned to appreciate extremely complex storytelling, so there's a gap. There's a huge gap. You have to be able to tell your stories so that you're telling extremely complex stories, but kids understand those, though they might not be able to read those. And you have to write it so that they can read it. Again, a tremendous juggling act. And then lastly, the reason that I really, really write, and I've written 5 books for children so far, the reason I write for kids is I believe that they are our most important audience. I really think that we humans, just take a look around, we've messed up the world pretty badly. All of us, the elders, look at the world we're handing to our kids. They're going to have to live with the mess. They're going to have to sort it out. And therefore, it is really important that we speak to them now and explain to them what the issues are. That we prepare them for this terrible world that they're going to step into. And we do that through stories. And that is really why I write, because I feel it behooves us to do this with our children, to make amends in some way for what we have done. So, ta-da. Okay. One other reason I wrote Dungeon Tales was at that time I was working in television, and television was driving me crazy, completely crazy. Not just because television is what it is. If you write for TV, and at that point the dominant, and it still is, the dominant storytelling form in television is the daily soap. So if you write a daily soap, you're writing 5 episodes a week, 5 half-an-hour episodes a week. You're writing 20 episodes a month. You're writing the equivalent of 10 films every month. That's a hell of a lot of writing, okay? And that's done under all kinds of pressures, which I'll explain to you when I come to that bit. But it was driving me insane, so I said I have to keep my sanity. I have to have one sole project that keeps me sane, and so I started writing Dungeon Tales. And once I'd written that book, I was like, okay, I need another sole project that'll keep me sane. And every morning I'd wake up and I'd open a newspaper, and there on the front page or somewhere in the paper would be some terrible, horrific thing that had been done to a woman. We treat women terribly in India. We strip them and parade them naked. We rape them. They're at the bottom of the power construct. Terrible, terrible things happen to women. And I would read these stories and they would make me so angry, so angry. So I said, okay, this needs a book. But But I don't want this book to be a feminist rant. I want it to be a book that people will read. So having now learned how to con people into sitting through stories in television, I use the same lessons. I said, okay, let's write a bunch of ghost stories. But each ghost story is actually around a feminist theme. So Washer of the Dead is a collection of feminist ghost stories. It was shortlisted for the Frank O'Connor Award. It is one of my all-time favorite books. And I was recently very, very happy to learn that a couple of women's groups in Mumbai who work with marginalized women and with sex workers, etc., have translated the stories into Hindi. And they use them in workshops, and they say the women really respond to these stories because in story form they can identify power structures, they can identify their entire experience. So they've had a lot of luck with using these stories as workshop material. So this is The Washer of the Dead. It's a slim little book. It's a difficult to read book. So I'm just going to read you a little bit from the beginning. This is the introduction to the book. And it starts with, do you believe in ghosts? That's the sort of question you ask yourself at the part of the night when the ordinary noises of the day have eased into such a deep quiet that it's impossible to sleep. 3 cups of coffee. I should have known this would happen. I lie awake and wonder. So, do you believe in ghosts? I don't know if I do. Of course, every family has its little collection of stories. The aunt who saw something once at a boarding school. The uncle born with a caul on his head, blessed with spirit sight. The cousin who was half an idiot, possessed at the age of 15, how she fiercely convulsed on the sheets and spoke in many branch voices. Carefully, the stories are hoarded for the nights when the power fails, and the eerie wash of candlelight makes anything believable. The children huddle together, shuddering deliciously. The ghosts dance between the flames and the storyteller. The stories twist and turn blackly on the walls, and it is all true after all. India is a land that has long been haunted. Each region has its own legion of those that return. Their names spill like an incantation, a sacred litany, a roll call of the restless. Firelight dances, their names are whispered with many a look over the shoulder, and the living rub up uneasily against the dead. And then there's a whole litany of the ghosts that come from across India. It was fascinating to discover the kind of ghosts that come from across India. From Assam comes the enchantress with a voice of desire. You hear this beautiful woman singing, and you follow her and you're lost. The only way you can escape is she can't cross running water, so cross running water and stand on the other side. In Uttar Pradesh, they tell of the changeling. Your little baby will vanish, and there will be a child in your cradle who will grow sicker and sicker as the moon waxes. In Lucknow, they tell of ghosts that love music, poetry, and the good life. They have haunted the halls of Nawabs, sat aching to the sound of wistful shairi. Okay. The ghats on the banks of the Ganga are haunted by the dancing churels with their feet turned backwards and the voices that squeeze out through pinched nostrils. The many level wandering lanes of Hyderabad and Allahabad are a jinn's delight. They wander wistfully from one tilting terrace to the next, looking for women with long black hair and tiny white hands, and if they find them, they fall in love with them. So all across India, hundreds and hundreds of local ghosts. Okay. Hurrying through the forest of Himachal Pradesh, you'll hear a child crying. Don't pick it up. You'll never be able to put it down again. Okay. So why do they return? What do they seek, all these troops of phantoms, these vast, shuffling crowds of hollow-eyed and rattling specters? Something they have lost? I think perhaps they turn restless on the high wind of the centuries because they are still searching for all that they never had in life, for happiness, for warmth, for love. Okay? In the kernel of each of our lives lies the making of a ghost. Sleeping in each of us lies the void that they wander in, voiceless till we allow them to speak. Okay. In each of us lies the timeless chasm that stretches blue and aching across the years, the need that hungers on. Many of the living are haunted even as they breathe. And we go on to a collection of stories. Okay. Okay, so there I was in Mumbai, writing feminist ghost stories and writing television. And it got to a point where I said, I can't do this anymore. Because the Saas Bahu genre of filmmaking came in and it just stayed. And all of you know what the Saas Bahu genre is. In India, we are lucky that we have many, many, many female icons that are very powerful. There's Durga, there's Parvati, there's Kali, there's so many powerful goddesses. And yet, the only icon that television honors is the Sati Savitri, the woman who puts everything aside for love of her family and her husband. And as I saw this unfolding, I said, this is not something I can do to my fellow women. I mean, I've spent my life trying to define myself as a woman against all the odds in India. I fought a long, hard battle. Women who are not as lucky as me with the way they were born or the way they were educated fight impossibly difficult battles. I can't do it, so I quit television. I said, that's it. And I ran away to a place called Goa. Okay, so when I wrote this book, one of the things that happened was I was forced to define what being female is in India, what being female meant to me. I was forced to answer the question, who am I? And this is what any kind of creative endeavor does. Whatever kind of creativity you have, whether you write or you compose music or you paint, you will always bump up against the big questions. And one of the big questions is, who am I? And it's a question that I've kind of bit by bit pieced together through all the many books and all the work that I've done. But this is really one of the reasons why art is very important. Because art helps you see a reflection of yourself. It helps you define the world around you in your terms. Okay. So when I started out being a writer, you're not quite sure what kind of writer you want to be. Do I want to be literary and win the Booker Prize? Do I want to, what kind of writer am I? And I was doing this little creative exercise where they asked you to write down all the writers that you admire. It's well worth doing. So I wrote down all the writers I admire. And then they said, what do all these writers have in common? And I looked at my list and I went, oh, because I'd put down Mahashweta Devi, I'd put down Charles Dickens, I'd put down Orwell. And what all of these had in common is they use writing to fight the good fights. I mean, Charles Dickens is amazing. One man writing about chimney sweeps and child labor forced England to change the laws on child labor. Mahashweta Devi is amazing. She's fought for the rights of tribals for years on the ground and in her books. George Orwell wrote with haunting precision about the future, which we are now living. And I said, that's the kind of writer I am. I want to entertain, of course, and that I learned again from television and film. Unless you're entertaining them, they're not going to be sitting in the chair to listen to the rest of what you have to say. So certainly entertain them, but also touch their hearts and minds, make them think. So I was clear this is the kind of writer that I want to be. And that's the kind of writer I've tried very hard to be. Okay, so while I was doing this, as I said, okay, I'm quitting television. I'm never doing television again. Of course, my activist side sat up and said, but what about the rest who are doing television? Are they all going to suffer the way you suffered? I said, no, I shall write a book. And the book is called Writing and Surviving Television. Part of the book is about writing for television. A lot of it is about surviving television, because television is difficult. When we started out, television was a beautiful, artisanal, handmade product. We had the best writers from Hindi literature writing for television. We had fabulous filmmakers take to television. I don't know if anyone in this room remembers. We had such great, do you remember Tamas? Do you remember Hum Log? Do you remember Nukkad? We started with such fine writing, and then it all rapidly went downhill. And the reason it went downhill was we discovered that one way of getting people to watch television again and again is get them hooked, make it a habit. And the one way of getting it to be made a habit is to do a daily soap. Now, once you're doing a daily soap and you need 20 episodes a month, the last thing that you need is a temperamental writer. The last thing you need is a writer. Because writers have vision. As a writer, I'm not going to write any rubbish. I'm going to say, I have a thought, and this is the way I see it, and this is what my characters will ultimately say. That's the last thing they need. They need interchanging faces, because what they're setting up is a writing factory. Everyone must be disposable. They did the same thing to directors. Every episode in television, I don't know whether you watch TV anymore, but when the names of the directors come on, there'll be 5 names in the minimum. There'll be director, there'll be sequence director, there'll be action director, there'll be, because everyone's running to catch up in daily soaps, one episode is being shot in 5 different places at the same time. And therefore, 5 different directors are shooting it. And your writer is being given instructions like, okay, so on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, we don't have this actor. Please rewrite the scene so he's not available. And on so-and-so date, this actress is going to play Dandiya in Gujarat. So please remove her from the storyline. And this was how we wrote. we wrote to these absurd kind of demands. We'd be told, oh, the TRPs have come in, and we don't have enough viewership in Gujarat. Please introduce a Gujarati character. And you'd be like, when? They'd say, TRP is coming on Friday. By Monday. So on Saturday, you'd write the character, they'd cast it, they'd clothe it, they'd shoot him on Sunday, they'd edit it Sunday night, and Monday it would be on air. Okay? I've actually been in a control room in Sony. We used to beam, all our stuff used to be beamed out of Hong Kong. For the simple reason, it therefore follows Hong Kong censorship rules and not Indian censorship rules. So all of your TV channels still beam out of Hong Kong. I've actually been in a room where we've shoved in the tape and it's playing one segment of a soap just before we go to ad break, and the next segment is being edited behind me. You know, and play some more ads. We'd find long ads, put the long ads, because that would give us 3 minutes more to finish the edit, shove the next tape in. So this was the kind of madness that continues to happen in television, by the way. And I was in the middle of it, and I just gave up. And instead, I wrote the book. Okay, it was meant to be a practical guide, as it says, a handbook for aspiring writers, and was very practical. I'll just read you a little bit to show you just how practical it was. Okay? So it starts with ideas. Let's start at the very beginning with the idea, capital I. So you have an idea. There are a lot of ideas in the world. I've lost count of the times that people have walked up to me and said, I have this great idea, it would make for a lovely serial, film, novel. I never say, oh my God, how wonderful. Instead, my more prosaic and no doubt highly disappointing reaction always is, have you registered it? Before we leap into the creative realm of ideas, here's a very sobering thought. Copyright does not exist for an idea. Copyright only exists for the expression of an idea. That means you have to write it down. If you have a great idea rattling around in your head and you happen to meet a friend and excitedly share it and the friend goes and sells it to Karan Johar for $1 million, guess what? There's nothing you can do. Now, if you had written it down and registered it, the story would have an action-packed climax, which would include Karan Johar on his knees in front of you. So this is a practical guide to writing for television. Okay. Okay, so my life has always been divided in two. I've always written at two extremes. So at one end is the world of books, and thank God for it. In books, you're God. You write it. Nobody tells you what to do. Nobody tells you they hate it. Nobody tells you change that character. Nobody tells you we need a Gujarati character added immediately. None of that happens. I love writing books. Television and films are very different. Television especially. You see, television, when you're telling a story, it's interrupted by 3 ad breaks. So that's like telling a joke, and just before the punchline, you cut away to something for like 4 minutes and then come back. And again, you're about to tell, and you cut away. So television becomes all about structure. You have to structure so that before you go to an ad break, something very exciting happens. I mean, the bahu is arrested, the husband is arrested, the saas is arrested, somebody is arrested, something happens. So this is a very tight structure that you learn. Writing for television is also, you need a story that never ends. The minimum a daily soap needs to run to recoup the money that has been spent on it is 2 years. So when you're writing, you're structuring something that has to have enough meat and story to last 2 years. Okay, that's a lot of story. So what you structure are potentialities. You don't structure actual story. You know, you structure secrets. You structure characters that can be unraveled in different ways. It's a completely different approach. So that's television. The last thing that's really different about television, I mean, there are lots, I'm not going to get into it. For me, that was really important was, while I was at Sony, I shifted to Goa, and I said, that's it, I'm never doing television again. And Sony came calling, and I said, no, I'm done, I'm not doing Saas Bahu. They said, okay, let us show you one episode of a series that we want to do. And they showed me an episode of Betty La Fey. That's Ugly Betty, if you've seen it in English. And we eventually did a show called Jassi Jaisi Koi Nahi. And I fell in love. I said, I'm coming back for this. Because we finally had an ugly heroine. A heroine who bucked the odds. A heroine with a moral standpoint. A heroine who was not nuts about boys. Oh, it was such a relief. I said, I'm coming back to do this. So I went back to Sony. And I worked out a lovely deal where I used to live in, I used to do Sony Monday to Thursday. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'd be in Goa. Okay. So I went back to Sony to do Jassi Jaisi Koi Nahi. And what Sony does once every 3 years is they do a massive research. They do focus groups, they talk to people, and it comes back as this big fat thing. And they ask people, what are you watching? Why are you watching it? And then they extrapolate what television means to people. And when I read that report, it really frightened me. Because in the words of women in that report, what did television mean to them? Television was their friend. They use the word Sakhi. She was the one who gave them advice. She was the one who came into their home and told them how to deal with the issues they were dealing with. I had tears in my eyes. I said, these are the stories we're giving them, and this is what television means to people. So to my mind, television is a fabulously powerful medium. It is the only medium that comes home, sits in your home, talks to you one-on-one as a friend, and therefore you listen. And really, it behooves us to do better than we've been doing. Okay, so that's television. Films is a whole new ball game. But at least in films, you get to tell one cohesive story, and there's only one pee break in the middle. And to me, the thing about books, which is different from all visual media, and this is the reason I believe that books will never go out of style and people will always read them, is if you're watching a movie or a television or something on your phone, what you're getting is a pre-digested story. When they say dragon, you see the dragon up there with its scales and its nails and everything. When they set it in a period, you see everyone dressed that way. All of it is taken care. You have to sit there passively and absorb a story. That's not true of a book. A book only works when you take yourself into the book. You have to take your experience and bring it to a book. When they say dragon, a dragon forms in your mind. That is amalgamation of what the writer is describing and your idea of what a dragon is. When a writer writes about hope and betrayal, what you're bringing to it is the hope and betrayal that you've experienced in your life. And therefore, books are such wonderful things. For me as an author, I'm always having conversations, intimate conversations through books with unknown people. As a reader, I'm stepping into another world. I'm learning to color my world with the story that's been told in that book. And that's why really why I think books are not going anywhere. They'll always be around because books demand a piece of you. They're not passive reading at all. And that is why they're so powerful. When you give yourself to a story, you become part of the story, it stays with you. Okay, what did television teach me? Everyone thinks thinking up ideas is like this. Not when you're on TV. I'm sorry. When you're on TV, you're given a brief. While you're in an auto rickshaw, you're bouncing along, and they say, we're shooting it in 15 minutes, so you're writing while you're on the rickshaw. You can't have a creative block. There is no time to have a creative block. So this is one of the things that television taught me was just keep writing. There is no such thing as a creative block. So, so you have an idea. I'm unfortunately not a great respecter of ideas. By my reckoning, they lie thick on the ground. What good are you as a writer if you can't knock out at least 3 to 4 ideas a week? The mark of a good writer is where he takes that idea, how he develops it, and makes it into a workable, valuable thing. This really is, and this television totally taught me. Sit down, get your butt on the desk, and just write. Okay, the second thing that television taught me is you can't wait for inspiration. You have to go after it with a club. And this is so true. If I waited for inspiration, I would write maybe 4 days in the year. I don't wait for inspiration. What, however, keeps me going is getting mad. I've written book after book just because I got so damn mad. The anger lasted through an entire book. Inspiration doesn't last, anger does. Okay. So this is it for all of you who want to be writers or any kind of other creative person. What makes the difference between a published author and an unpublished author? Basically, the published author never gave up. You just went at it and at it and at it. You see the 10,000 rule, we have this great 10,000. If you want to learn a skill, you have to spend 10,000 hours on it. If I told you how to learn the piano, you'd practice every day. But for writing, we put it in another box that says inspiration. I'll write when I have inspiration. And really, why? Write every day. At the end of the day, it's also a skill that you need to polish like any other skill. And this is what separates the professionals from the amateurs. The professionals write. The amateurs wait for inspiration. So that's it really. Keep writing. And if you do keep at it, you will get better at it. And eventually, you'll be good enough to be published. Okay. So a lot of what I've written has come out of things that made me mad. A lot of what I've written is also come out of things that I loved. And about 20 years ago, the most beautiful love came into my life. You can see her there. She's guarding one of my favorite books. That's The Writer's Journey by Vogler. And this is Kajri. She's the first dog that I ever had. And I fell in love. She's the reason I became vegetarian. I said, you can't eat one kind of animal and, love another kind of animal. And she became the reason why my heart opened a little bit. And I began to see the other beings that we share the world with a little bit differently. And when I looked around and saw the way that we treat animals, oh my God, that made me super mad. It made me so mad it lasted to 3 whole books. 3 books. Okay, so this is the Animal Intelligence Agency series. The question I asked myself was, what if animals got mad? What if they came out seeking revenge? What if somebody trained them so that they became like Animal James Bond? What if they were sent on missions to right the evils in the world that are done to animals? So I formed the Animal Intelligence Agency. Its motto is, save the animals, save the world. It consists of Baga, Agent 002, who is a Royal Bengal tiger. It consists of Rana, who is an 11-and-a-half-year-old boy, Agent 11.5. And then there is Agent 00. He's a monkey called Kela, and his number's been taken away because of something terrible that he did. So together they go on missions, and each book actually takes a single issue. So, okay, I'll just come back to this. So, Tiger by the Tail took on the issue. They sent on a mission to find out why all these tigers vanishing from India. Where are they going? And if you don't, do you know the answer where all the tigers going? They're all going to China. Chinese medicine is the single biggest reason that we lose tigers the way that we do. A full tiger is used, every bit of him is used for Chinese medicines, from his whiskers to his bones, to the fur, to the liver, to the spleen. A tiger is worth between 64 lakhs to 1.6 crores. That's what he's worth when he's dead, not while he's alive and he's in a park. The entire, the dhanda goes all the way up. I was at the Corbett Park, and our guide was absolutely furious because the tiger had just been declared dead, and the authorities had declared that he had died because he was hungry and he ate an old leather chappal, and it killed him. He said, and nobody will say a word. That's the official report. The money goes all the way up to the chief minister because it's very large money. So this is what we're doing. So Tiger by the Tail, they go to China. We have a finale in Tiger by the Tail where 200 real tigers walk through Tiananmen Square. They march through Tiananmen Square and take a salute from the People's Liberation Army. Okay, Dead as a Dodo. In this, I took on the issue of extinction. The last living dodo is found. Everybody wants him because he's priceless. What does the dodo want? He just wants a date. He's the last living dodo. He says, I have to make babies. Find me somebody. So unfortunately, the AIA have to become a matchmaking agency. This was important to me because I don't know if you know this, but we are in the middle of the 6th extinction. It's the largest. We've seen the extinction of the dinosaurs. We've seen 5 others after that. This is the largest extinction that has ever taken place in the history of mankind, and only one animal is responsible for it. That's us. Every day we lose 200 species that cannot be replaced. 200 species across plants, animals, birds. This is what we're doing. So this was written to fight that. And Monkey See, Monkey Do. Monkey See, Monkey Do took on the issue of animal testing. And I don't know whether you know how bad this really is. All the shampoo that you use to make your hair nice and shiny, all the conditioners you use, the moisturizer for your face, all of this is tested on animals. Rabbits have their eyelids cut off, and shampoo is dropped into their eyes until they go blind so that it can be tested as to how toxic it is. And every batch of shampoo is tested. It's not like it's tested once to create a new shampoo. By law, in many countries, luckily not in India, every batch of shampoo that is produced has to be tested. Okay, dogs have their skin shaved, and stuff is rubbed onto it until they have huge sores, so that they won't make a noise in the laboratory. Their vocal cords are removed. I won't do it. We have children in the audience, but I cannot tell you the misery that fuels the beauty business and the food business. The misery that fuels that chicken leg that's on your plate, that fuels the sausages that you eat. If you go out and read about it, you look at the images, I can guarantee you'll turn vegetarian. And we are able to ignore this because it's not under our noses. One of the activists said that if you made it a law for every slaughterhouse to have glass walls, everybody would turn vegetarian because you'd see what you're doing. So this was about that. And these 3 books helped me answer another big question, which is the one that all... Oh, I'm going forward instead of going backwards. Where do I go? Yeah. And this was a question, how do you live in the world? As a creative person, how do you live in the world? Unfortunately, there's this great myth that artists live in ivory towers. They require solitude. They need to be alone to see their vision. And I say to you, this is utter rubbish. Okay? Go back and read the letters that artists have left behind. Look at the work. Why did Pablo Picasso do Guernica? Who was the first, one of the first people to fight for animal rights was a vegetarian, was Da Vinci. As an author, as a creative person, I don't think you're called to live in an ivory tower. You are called to live in this world and respond to this world. Because one of your biggest tools as a creative person is empathy. Where are you without empathy? And with empathy, how can you not engage with the world around you? So my writing taught me the answer to the question, to be or not to be. Whether it's wiser to take up arms, should we not be and just sit in our little soul silos making pretty pictures? Or do we get out there and fight it? And my answer was the resounding, take arms against the sea of trouble. So I've been fighting a lot. And I hate this false idea of the artist. I also teach creative workshops. And this is one of the ideas that I always fight. The idea that an artist is not of this world. He's slightly different. He's something else. Not everyone can be an artist. What utter rubbish. Have you ever given a child a crayon and a piece of paper? Have they turned to you and said, I'm not an artist, I can't draw? Picasso says, everyone's an artist. The problem is how to stay one as you grow older. So everybody's an artist, but as an artist, you have to choose how to live in the world. Okay, let's go forward. Sit down. Okay, and where did I choose to live in the world? I chose to live in Goa. And living in Goa did a few absolutely wonderful things for me. The first thing it did was it slowed me down. And this I truly believe. I think as creators, you need to slow down. Okay? You don't need to cut yourself off from the world, but you need to have deeper roots. When you're living in a world where you're doing stuff like this all the time, your roots tend to be very shallow. For simple thing like, in Goa, I know when there's a full moon coming around. Bombay, I never knew. You never looked upwards. If you looked upwards, the sky was a neon orange. And now I realize my cycles of writing are so tied to the moon. Now I don't even need to look up in the sky. The minute I start writing 4,000 words a day, I'm like, there's a full moon around the corner. And surely there is. 2 days later, there'll be a full moon. So your cycles are tied to things that are larger than the present. And you discover that when you find a space where you can ground yourself and grow deep roots. The second thing that I loved about Goa was the community, the sense of community. In cities, we live in these little matchboxes stacked upon each other. And I could have lived in a building 3 years, I still wouldn't have known who my neighbors were. We're all so busy. Where in Goa, mango time comes around and neighbors are sending you mangkurads. You're sending them bananas from your trees. Somebody else is, if my mother's not out one day with the dogs, someone comes to ask, is she all right? Everything fine at home? The sense of living enmeshed in a community was so beautiful. And I think losing this sense is one of the things that's wrong in the world today. It's so easy to think only of yourself when you've lost a sense of community. But when you live in a community and you see how problems of water affect everyone, how when you see garbage affects the entire village. When you think about a water table that's serving an entire village, not just you think of water in those terms, your idea of yourself expands to include so many more. And this also is part of empathy. So living in a community has been absolutely wonderful. I recommend it to everyone who wants to be a creator of any sort. Okay, having left Mumbai and run away, Mumbai had not yet left me. I wrote a book called Boy Number 32. And this came out of, when you're working in TV and film, you're always late. You're always shooting late. You're invariably catching the last local that leaves from Churchgate Station. So I'd be sitting in the last local. And on the last local, you'll always find the odds and the ends. You'll find all the people who normally live in the cracks. So there would be all the hijras, the eunuchs. There'd be the little kids who beg. There would be the women who sell ribbons and hair clips to you, and they'd all be sitting around sorting out their ways, and they'd all chat with me. And I would chat with all these kids, and I just thought, what stories? Look at the courage of these children. They face rejection on an everyday basis. Every time they put out their hands, they're rejected. And yet, they're bright, they're chirpy, they're chatting with you, they're telling you jokes. I like somebody has to tell these stories. The stories we tell are always of middle-class children going to school. I mean, look at Harry Potter. While it's very inclusive, your central hero is still your everyday boy. Look at a lot of our Indian writing. I said, no, somebody has to tell the stories of those that come from the margins. So boy number 32 does that. It tells the story of Battis. He's a little orphan boy, and nobody's ever loved him enough to give him a name. So he's boy number 32. He's Battis. That's his number in the roll call. He happens to see a terrorist place a bomb, and he's the only one who can identify the terrorist. So everyone wants him dead. So he goes on the run, and as he goes on the run, I paid a tribute to the city of Mumbai. So this is kind of slumdog millionaire a kind of approach, where I paid a tribute to the Mumbai that I had learned to love, to the hijras, to the beggars, to the taxi drivers. So there's a hijra called Item, which has a great item number. There's all kinds of fabulous characters in there, all which come out of everyday life in Mumbai, and that's my tribute. This little book went quite a long way, I must say. It won the Hindu Award for Best Fiction. Previous to that, actually, Dead as a Dodo also won the Hindu Award for Best Fiction. And yep, it's still on the shelves out there. Okay. What's the time? Because I do want to save a little time for question and answers. So, do we have time? Can I read you a little bit from boy number 32? This is the beginning of the book. It's called The Things Inside My Head. So, are you listening? It was dark. It was as dark as the inside of the ear of a rat down a septic tank under a building. Trust me, I've been in a septic tank like that, and it's dark. In the movies, your whole life flashes before your eyes just before you die. Hero takes 20 bullets and whoosh, he's seeing the highlights of his life. Loving wife, darling daughter, lots of violence playing in the background. My eyes were shut tight. And guess what? Same thing happened. It was like being at the movies. And this was the kind of film where you'd buy a ticket on black and go back 3 times to see it again. It was that good. There was a father with a mustache and a smile that made his eyes into little slits. There was a mother who was always smiling and singing about the house. There was a dog that ate out of a tin plate and banged it on the ground when he wanted more. And there was a child they loved. A real family that was happy together. Hindi film happy, happy ever after happy. Oh, the loving moments between that mother and father. The way they adore that child of yours. Okay, so there's this great life story that fast forwards past me, except there's only one problem. It's not mine. I've never had a father or a mother. I mean, I've made them up. I've imagined them. I've lied about them a million times. But the truth is that there is just one big fat blank where the happy family should be. And nobody has ever sung me to sleep. I'll tell you that. Cursed me to sleep plenty of times. These memories were real, but they belonged to someone else. And that someone else was inside my head. Someone was inside my head. So, okay. So, yeah. So that's boy number 32. Okay, so then I keep getting mad. I got mad with Chetan Bhagat. I was like, what nonsense? This man is writing this rubbish and he's earning millions. What nonsense? I shall write a love story and it will have substance. So I did, but I wrote it under pseudonym because like, oh God, they're going to start clubbing me in with Chetan Bhagat immediately, and I don't want to do that. So I'm a very cranky Bengali author called Kiya Ghosh. I've written a book called House of Stars. It's a love story, but it's also a take on the Kashmir issue and about violence and non-violence, and where do you stand on the issue of non-violence when it comes into your home. So that's this one. Okay. I keep losing my clicker. Here. Okay, and now we come to the book that I'm currently promoting. It came out earlier this year. This is a book called All of Me. And this was one that was really mad. And the person who made me mad was David Cameron. David Cameron came to India and he was asked, will you be returning the Kohinoor to India? And he said, I don't believe in returnism. which has to be the most arrogant, colonial, idiotic thing to ever say. You ignore that it is stolen from here. It has been stolen on the back of misery and horror that you've meted out to millions of Indians, and you say, I don't believe in returnism. So I was like, okay, that's it. This has to be written about. I also wrote this book because I was very worried. Our kids are reading colonial history in textbooks, in schools, in dry as dust textbooks, where they don't seem to get very mad about it. I said, I need to make this come back to life again. I need people to be mad about this. So I wrote All of Me. So All of Me is actually, I had great fun because this one's set in Victorian England. I'm a great fan of Sherlock Holmes and all of the writing across that time. I said, I'm setting my book there. So it starts with a boy who's been locked in a dungeon for 5 years. And when they take him out, because he's been alone for so long, he's been fed every day by his uncle, but he's been alone in the dark, he's created a whole range of characters to keep him company. These are all his multiple personalities. So there's Mr. Pickwick, who's a rector who keeps quoting the Bible. There's Miss Trent, who's a governess, who's very phobic about germs. Oh, please wash your hands, please wash your hands. There's a street urchin who's got the street smarts, who knows how to survive. And there is my favorite character. There's the infant prodigy, and he is indeed an infant prodigy. You can tell him any sum and he'll answer it like that. And our young boy, Castor, when he comes out, wants to know why he's been locked away for 5 years. So he becomes detective with the help of his multiple personalities. And they go on the hunt of why was I locked away, and he discovers that his family has a connection to the Kohinoor. His mother is actually an Indian princess. And it's set at the time when the Kohinoor has just been brought to England by Duleep Singh. Duleep Singh's supposed to hand it over to Queen Victoria. In later years, Duleep Singh actually called her Mrs. Fagan because she stole his diamond from him. So Duleep Singh figures in the book as well. And it humanizes colonialism through the figure of Duleep Singh, a 14-year-old boy snatched from his mother, never allowed to see her. He saw her once in his life again before he died. Taken to England, forcibly converted, forced to hand over his diamond as a symbol of a submission and surrender to the British. And the book came together, and this book has had a great run. It's been nominated for awards I didn't know existed. So it won the Peekabook Children's Voice Awards, which I was very happy about, because there's a children's jury that reads the books and chooses them, so that was fantastic. It's on the IBI Honor Roll. The IBI Honor Roll is an international honor roll chosen by librarians around the world, so that made me so happy. I said, all right, librarians have chosen me, yes. It's been on the Publishing Next shortlist. It's on the FICCI Best Books Award shortlist, and it is also on the Crosswords shortlist right now for the Crossword Book Awards. So yeah, All of Me unexpectedly having a good run, because I said, okay, I've written this, but I don't know if people are going to read a book about Victorian England and multiple personalities, but it's doing its own thing. Okay. And so we come to my last book, just out, released 2 months ago. Oh, okay. Yeah, I did want to cover this. Okay. So the title there says, Why I Renounced Enid Blyton. When I grew up, I loved Enid Blyton. I wanted to write like Enid Blyton. And it took me so many years of defining myself as a person, as a woman, as an Indian, to turn around and say, what rubbish is this? Because what does Enid Blyton write? Firstly, what does she hold up for us to admire as heroes? The kids are white. They have blonde hair, they have blue eyes, they live in England, they eat scones. I grew up wanting to eat scones. I finally got to eat them at Chocolati, and I was like, this is it? Because in my mind, there were these glorious things that you had at midnight feasts. So I grew up wanting to be, aspiring to be something that I could not. I grew up admiring a story that did not belong to me. And this is what happens when your children read books that are from all around the world and not from India. They are learning to admire heroes that they cannot be. They're learning to admire stories in which they can never have a part. You are expecting your children to go out into the world and take their place in that world. How will they? How will they? Because they have been colonized. And the colonization of the imagination is the worst kind of colonization there is. If the only superheroes that your kids love are Batman and Spider-Man and Superman and oh, you've got a problem. Okay? Your heroes must belong to yourself, and this is why you need to read Indian stories and Indian authors. You must feel that you fully belong in the story. You must feel that the fight is your fight, that you can step out with a right into the world. And that's why I say read Indian authors. I also say read Indian authors because you cannot imagine the fantastic books that Indian authors are writing these days. There's a whole load of, there's Paro Anand, there's Subhadra Sengupta, there is Anushka Ravishankar. I mean, there's a list, my arm long, and I keep handing this to librarians, to schools that we go to, saying, get these books. So one of the things I am is I'm a scholastic reading ambassador. And there are two interesting things out of that. One is that when I was promoting Boy Number 32, I visited schools across India. I visited 82 schools across India. And I said, send me to the little towns. So I went to Erode, and I went to Tirupur, and I went all over the place. And every place I'd go, I'd ask the kids, what are you reading? And Percy Jackson, Geronimo Stilton, all of this would happen. And I'd say, okay, what Indian author are you reading? And then they'd say, Rabindranath Tagore, Sudha Murthy. I'd say, okay, give me an Indian author who's not dead and not over 70. And there'd be no answer. Children are not reading Indian authors. Then I would nag the librarian with my list saying, buy these, buy these, buy these, because to me this is incredibly important. Scholastic, the other interesting thing I'd like to share with you is Scholastic does a reading report every year across India where they, again, do research, and they ask people, ask kids, what are you reading, why are you reading, how are you reading, and they publish the results. And I always get asked by parents, but our children are not reading, how do we get them to read? Number one finding year after year on the Scholastic Reading Report is parents who read have children who read. The problem is not that your children aren't reading, the problem is that you aren't reading. Children will value what they see valued. If you value books, your children will value books. So two things to take away from that. And reading Indian authors, and I would really, really urge you to get out there and find these Indian authors. There's some great, great work being done. Okay, so at one point I got mad with Goa. I was part of the Goa Bachao Abhiyan, and we fought the regional plan. I spent 2 years of my life doing that darn thing. My daughter was very little. I'd have her on my hip and I'd be standing in the hot sun explaining to people why this regional plan was a really bad thing. And I learned how to do regional plans. I did the regional plan for my village, Moira. We put together a 20-year planning document for the village. I did all of this, and it made no damn difference. You know, till today, do we have a regional plan in place? No, we do not. We've just been outmaneuvered and outwitted by those in power. At one point, I got so angry. I said, I can't do this anymore, and I can't bear to see Goa dirty, and my heart is broken, and I'm leaving, and I left. And I went all the way to Coimbatore. I was in Coimbatore for 3 years. And while I was in Coimbatore, I missed Goa tremendously. And so I went back and pulled out a manuscript, which I had written I mean, this is about 10 or 12 years old, this book actually. And when I first wrote it, I was very enthusiastic. Yeah. So I did the one thing that I tell all writers and creative people not to do. Do not share raw work. Do not ask for feedback on raw work. Just don't do it, because you'll get feedback. You're asking people to criticize, so they will criticize, right? They will go out of their way to tell you what is wrong with this. And when they finish, you will feel like, oh my God, this is such a piece of shit, and you just put it away and never touch it again. So I shared my manuscript with the Goa Writers Group, and they criticized it really beautifully. They criticized it so well, I put it away for 12 years. But sitting in Coimbatore, I pulled it out and I read it. I said, hey, this is a good story. I can do something with this. And so this book finally got its second avatar in life. It's called Whisper in the Wind. It's set in Portuguese Goa. Let me just read you the back blurb. It's a very complex book. And to me, this is a really interesting book, because what happened in this book was, there's the story and there's a metafiction that happens. The story is about the story, but it's also about the process of writing. And it starts with a young boy. He's a fussy, prissy, Parsi boy. It's 1947. There's unrest across India, and he comes from a very, very rich business family. He's supposed to take over the business, but what he wants to do is write a book. So his mother, to get him out of India, sends him to Goa. He's got 1 month, and he has to write his book. A lot depends on this. So he arrives here, all prissy. He's never washed a dish in his life. He's always been waited on hand and foot. And he finds that the house he was told was this fine mansion that you'll be living in is actually a ruin in which nobody has lived for many years. But he decides he's going to grit his teeth and write his book. And then the story that he stumbles into accidentally He's wandering through the ruins of a church that are behind where he lives, and he hears this little voice shouting, Sarah, little girl, small little girl called Alice. And she tells him, have you seen Sarah? He says, who's Sarah? She says, my sister. Nobody will help me. She's missing. Will you help me find my sister? And he feels so sorry for this little girl. He's all right. Where do I go? She says, she's used to work in the house over there. So he goes to the house and asks about Sarah and gets a really over-the-top reaction. So then he discovers Sarah's missing for 5 years. He comes and tells the little girl, I can't find her. She's been missing for 5 years. And she says, but she's the only one I have. We're both orphans. She's my sister. I don't have anyone in the world. So much against his will, wanting only to write his book, he sets out to search for Sarah. The search for Sarah becomes a story. And the story is written side by side with him. So it's fun, and it's a murder mystery. It's got lots of twists and turns. And the twist that I like the most is right at the end. How does he find the truth? He finds the truth because he sits down to write it. He says, now I'm a writer. He's written bits and pieces. Now I'm a writer. I will let the story lead me. So climax of the book is actually 6 stories that he writes. He writes stories which lead you closer to the truth. And he forgets there's one more story. There's always a 7th story, the story that lies in the silences between the words. And he finally finds that story in the silence. And he finds that story, and this I love because this ties up what I've been talking about from the beginning. He finds that story when he asks, and then? He asks finally, and then, and he finds the story. So this is it. I'm just going to read you the opening paragraph. Tightly knotted enigmas. I can hear the wind stirring them. Which one is my story? The one that I alone can tell. Listen. And to me, really, many times stories find you, but very often you're asking, which is the story that I can tell? The one that belongs to me. And to do that, you have to listen. The greatest thing that Goa did for me was when it slowed me down, it also taught me to listen. Okay. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the creative process before we take questions. And that really, to me, is, I couldn't find a better example than this. This is what the creative process is for me, really. Because you're living in a world that's all around you, and then you're seeing it reflected within you. And these two things interact, and you tell your story. Okay. So, shall I address this in questions, my personal process of how I write, etc.? We can do that a little later. So I'm going to just tell you the things that I've learned on how to be an artist. And that's the last slide. We'll do questions after this. Take the art off the pedestal. Take the damn art off the pedestal. You know, I struggled for years with writing a film because, my God, you're writing a film. And then one day I sat there saying, I write daily soaps. I write a 30-minute screenplay. I write in 2 or 3 days. What is a film? A film is 4 screenplays, 4 30-minute screenplays. Should take me 10 days, 15 days maximum. Says, okay, I'll sit and write a film in 15 days. So I did. I got out a first draft. It was not a bad first draft. And suddenly I realized writing a film is just a matter of taking the damn thing off the pedestal. Take it off the pedestal, and you can do it. Same thing happened with books. You know, books are holy and sacred, and you must have, empty and silent time to work on them and say meaningful things. Yes, until you meet NaNoWriMo. Does anyone in this room know what NaNoWriMo is? Okay. Great. So the Americans love do-it-yourself stuff, right? So they have NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. So in November, they have a website, you sign up, and across 1 month, you race to finish a book, first draft. Just do it. Their whole attitude is just do it. I'll be like, okay, let me try this. And I did. And every year for NaNoWriMo, I have written a book. It gets the first draft off your chest, and then you just keep moving. Because writing is, it's like making something. Unless you have clay on that wheel, there's nothing you can make. Your first draft is your clay draft. Your second draft is your shaping draft. Your third draft is your polished draft. So I always call my first draft my vomit draft. I just vomit it out. I don't rewrite. I don't look back. I just keep writing forwards until I get to the end. Because it's only when you get to the end of the first draft can you understand what your story really is. The shape of your story becomes clear to you. So that's very important. So take it off the pedestal. Secondly, take the artist off the pedestal. Oh, for God's sake, please do that. Artists are meant to live in this world, feed off this world, and they owe something to the world. They they need to give back to the world as well. So when we worship all these artists making very pretty pictures and give you long, theoretical lectures, I mean, I go to these art shows, and besides one little piece of art will be one long thing which will tell me it's a metafictional discovery of the world, of the inner being, which psychologically reflect. I mean, rubbish. I don't believe in art like that. I have lived a life where art has served my life and I have served my art. And I really think, get off the pedestal, make the art that matters. Care about things. As an artist, your first tool is empathy. And if caring leads you into really weird places, like getting arrested at a Gram Sabha and being dragged out because you were shouting about the regional plan, well, it's part of the adventure. Listening to people. People are the stuff that your art will feed off. People are the things that will make up whatever you are writing or creating. Listen. Speak up. It is your duty as a citizen, as an artist, more than as a citizen, to speak up. And I hope all of you in this room right now are speaking up loud and clear right now. We know what's happening outside. We know the CAA. If you haven't yet gone for a protest for the CAA, I urge you to do that. Be silent. There is a silence, and here is the really funny thing, because I've gone through my life saying, forget about inspiration, put your butt on the chair, right? But at the other end of the spectrum is the other bits that I've also experienced, which is when you become a hollow bamboo and something plays through you. That also happens. It's magical when it happens, but it can't happen unless you start at this extreme spectrum. So now I balance two completely different beliefs in my head. One is that you need to live in the world and treat art like any other thing that you need to do. And at the same time, I truly believe that art is special. Art is not something that you control, that there is a muse and an inspiration and a greater story that speaks through you. I've experienced both of them. My last thing is stay forever young. Because unless you feel deeply, unless you are wide-eyed and wonderstruck, unless you go out and have adventures, what will your art feed off? So please, stay forever young in whichever way you can. Thank you.